All right, so you want to take a deep dive into how empires fall?
Yeah.
And you're really interested in this whole idea of fate?
Yeah.
Do empires make the same mistakes over and over again? Is history doomed to repeat itself?
Well, I mean, that's the question, right?
Right.
That's the question that's been haunting historians for centuries.
Exactly.
I mean, look, you've got empires across millennia, different cultures, different geographies, different technologies, and yet there are these eerie similarities.
Yeah, so where do we even begin to unpack all of this?
Well, I think a great place to start is with Sir John Glubb's The Fate of Empires.
Oh, yeah, great book.
A classic.
So he looked at all these different empires, right? From the Assyrians to the Romans to the British.
Yeah, he looked at empires across thousands of years.
And what did he find? What are some of the big takeaways?
Well, one of the most striking things is that he argues that the average lifespan of an empire is about 250 years.
250 years, regardless of, all these differences.
It's almost like there's this biological clock ticking away.
Like a timer
Yeah.
for empires.
And what's even more fascinating is that he breaks down this 250-year cycle into 6 distinct stages.
Okay, so it's not just like, boom, 250 years, lights out.
No, it's much more nuanced than that.
Yeah, so let's break down some of these stages.
Yeah.
Where does it all begin? Where do things start to go south for these empires?
Well, it all starts with this incredible burst of energy, this age of pioneers, people driven by a sense of purpose.
Right, they're expanding, they're conquering.
They're building, they're exploring, they're full of vigor.
Yeah, they're hungry.
They're hungry.
But then what happens? I mean, they're successful, right? So how does that lead to decline?
Well, that's the interesting thing. It's not necessarily external enemies or barbarian hordes at the gates that bring empires down.
So it's more about what's happening.
He's more insidious than that.
Internally.
It's the internal shifts, the cultural changes that accompany that success.
So it's almost like they become victims of their own success.
Precisely. Think about it. Comfort and luxury often lead to complacency. You lose that hunger, that drive.
The willingness to sacrifice.
That fueled that initial rise.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times.
Exactly. And Glubb uses some really vivid examples to illustrate this. He talks about the Roman Empire, how the later emperors became obsessed with lavish spectacles, bread, and circuses.
To keep the people happy.
To keep the people distracted. While the core of the empire...
Right, while Rome is crumbling.
Rotting from within.
Yeah, so they're focused on entertainment and distractions.
And he also talks about the Arab Empire, where you had this incredible intellectual and artistic flourishing in Baghdad.
Golden Age is Islam.
Exactly. But that eventually gave way to decadence, corruption, and...
Yeah, they lost their...
loss of that initial zeal.
It's fascinating how similar these patterns are across different empires and time periods.
It really is.
So are you saying that empires are destined to decline? Is it all just a matter of fate?
Well, it's not that simple.
Okay.
Glubb doesn't necessarily believe in a predetermined destiny.
Okay.
He acknowledges that internal factors are crucial.
Right, they set the stage.
They set the stage.
But then what?
But the specific way an empire falls is often influenced by external events.
So it's like a 1-2 punch.
Exactly.
Internal weakness creates vulnerability, and then some external pressure comes along.
Yeah.
And exploits that weakness.
Yeah. A weakened empire is like a boxer with a glass jaw.
Okay.
They might still look formidable from the outside.
Right. They still have all the outward appearances of power.
But one good blow can bring the whole thing crashing down.
And that blow could come from anywhere.
It could be a rival empire, a new technology,
a pandemic,
an economic crisis, even a natural disaster.
So fate might nudge them towards decline, but the final blow could come from any direction.
And that's where the concept of shared mistakes becomes really crucial.
Okay, tell me more about that.
If you look at history, you see empires making the same mistakes over and over again.
Like what? Give me some examples.
They overspend on military expansion.
Oh, okay.
They neglect their infrastructure.
Right. They don't maintain the things that made them strong in the first place.
They fail to adapt to changing circumstances.
So they get stuck in their ways.
Exactly.
And they become complacent.
And they succumb to corruption and internal divisions.
It's like they're blinded by their own power.
It's like each empire thinks it's somehow exceptional.
Right, like the rules don't apply to them.
That they're immune to the mistakes of their predecessors.
And that arrogance can be their downfall.
Exactly. And it often leads them to make reckless decisions.
Decisions that speed up their decline.
They become addicted to power, and they'll do anything to hold on to it.
Even if those actions ultimately weaken them in the long run.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
It really is.
That the very things that make an empire powerful can also be the seeds of its destruction.
So it's like a cautionary tale repeating itself across the centuries.
It's a reminder that power, no matter how great, is a double-edged sword.
Wow, I think we need a moment to process all of that.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
But you know what? We're just getting started.
That's right. We've got more to uncover.
We have more readings to dive into that might shed some light on how to break free from this cycle of rise and fall.
And maybe even learn from the mistakes of the past.
Stay tuned, folks, because this deep dive is far from over.
We'll be right back after a short break.
To continue our exploration of these fascinating patterns of history.
And what they might mean for us today.
See you soon.
Okay.
All right. So we've talked about how empires can kind of trip over their own feet, even when they seem to be at the top of their game.
Right. They get a little cocky.
Yeah. But is there any way to avoid this? I mean, can they course correct, or are they just doomed to repeat the same mistakes?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Paul Kennedy's work, The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers, really adds another layer to the discussion.
Okay, so what does Kennedy bring to the table?
Well, he dives into this specific mistake that empires often make, which he calls imperial overstretch.
Imperial overstretch?
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
So imagine an empire that's at the peak of its power, right?
Okay.
It got a vast military. It's involved in conflicts all over the world.
Okay, so they're trying to maintain this global dominance.
Exactly. But here's the catch.
Okay.
Their economic strength might not be keeping up with their military ambitions.
Ah, so it's like they're spending more than they can actually afford.
Precisely.
Like trying to run a marathon with a wallet full of lead weights.
Exactly. Eventually, you're going to collapse under the strain.
Yeah, makes sense.
And Kennedy argues that this mismatch between military commitments and economic capacity is a recipe for disaster.
So it's not just about spending too much with the military. It's about whether they can actually sustain that spending in the long run.
Exactly. And he gives some really compelling historical examples.
Okay, like what?
He points to the Habsburg Empire in the 16th and 17th centuries.
Okay.
They were trying to maintain control over these vast territories in Europe and the Americas.
Right, they were a huge empire.
And they ultimately went bankrupt, trying to keep up with their rivals.
Wow, so they overextended themselves and paid the price.
And it's not just ancient history either.
Oh, really?
Kennedy actually warned about the United States.
No way.
Potentially falling into this trap in the late 20th century.
So he saw some parallels between what happened to past empires and what was happening in the U.S. at that time.
He pointed out that the U.S. was facing increasing economic competition from countries like Japan and Germany, yet it continued to maintain this massive global military presence.
Interesting.
So he was sounding the alarm saying, hey, you know, this could be a problem down the road.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
Right.
You can't just keep spending without thinking about the consequences.
And it's almost like those in power get caught in this cycle of trying to maintain dominance at all costs.
Like they can't imagine not being on top.
Exactly. They get so used to being the top dog that they can't fathom the idea of anything changing.
It's like they're addicted to power and they're willing to make these short-sighted decisions to hold on to it.
Even if those decisions ultimately weaken them in the long run.
Okay, so we've got Glubb talking about this internal decay and Kennedy highlighting this imperial overstretch problem. Are these two concepts totally separate, or are they connected somehow?
That's a great question, and I think they're deeply intertwined.
Okay.
Because Glubb's internal factors, the decline in values, the focus on personal wealth, the loss of shared purpose, they all contribute to making an empire more susceptible to imperial overstretch.
So it's like this vicious cycle.
Exactly.
Internal weakness makes it harder to maintain economic strength,
which
then leads to overspending on the military, which further weakens the economy, and so on and so forth.
It's a downward spiral that can be incredibly difficult to break free from.
It's like they're driving a car straight towards a brick wall.
Yeah.
And instead of hitting the brakes, they just keep pressing harder on the gas pedal.
And what's really fascinating is that these patterns, they're not just limited to empires in the traditional sense.
Oh, really?
They can apply to any powerful nation, organization, or even individuals.
So it's not just about kings and conquerors. It's about anyone who wields significant power and influence.
Exactly. Anyone who becomes too caught up in maintaining their position.
And fails to adapt.
To changing circumstances.
Wow. So you're saying these patterns are almost embedded in human nature itself.
Well, that's a really profound question, and one that historians and philosophers have debated for centuries.
Right. I mean, it makes you wonder, are we inherently prone to these cycles of rise and fall?
Are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past?
Or is it possible to learn from history and create a more sustainable future?
That's the million-dollar question.
It really is.
And I think we need to dive into that a little bit further.
Yeah, let's pick up this conversation in the next part.
Absolutely.
We've got a lot more to unpack.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
You know, Glubb's internal factors, Kennedy's imperial overstretch. It paints a pretty sobering picture of how power, even at its peak, can kind of sow the seeds of its own destruction.
It's a bit of a paradox.
It really is. But here's the question that's been swirling in my mind.
Yeah.
Where do we fit into all of this? What can we learn from these patterns of history?
Right.
And maybe, just maybe, avoid repeating those same mistakes.
I mean, that's the crucial question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because while these theories, they focus on empires and great powers, the underlying principles, they can apply to us all.
To us regular folks.
To us regular folks, both individually and collectively.
So it's not just about presidents and prime ministers.
It's not just about the big guys.
It's about recognizing those patterns in our own lives, in our communities, even in the companies we work for.
Absolutely.
So Glubb stages, for example, they highlight the dangers of complacency and that seductive nature of affluence.
Right. When things are going well, when comfort and abundance become the norm,
you get used to it.
It's easy to lose sight of the values and the hard work that got us there.
You start to take things for granted.
Exactly.
You forget how good you have it.
And you become more focused on what you lack than what you already possess.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that's where the trap lies.
Yeah.
Because when we lose that sense of gratitude, that drive to strive for something greater, we become vulnerable to the very forces that Glubb describes.
Right.
The pursuit of pleasure over purpose. The erosion of shared values. The rise of internal divisions.
It's like a recipe for disaster.
It is.
So what about Kennedy's imperial overstretch?
Yeah.
Is there a parallel there for us regular folks?
Absolutely. Think about it in terms of personal goals.
Okay.
Or even just managing your time and energy.
Yeah.
We've all been there.
Yeah, we had.
Taking on too many projects.
Oh, yeah.
Overcommitting ourselves.
Spreading ourselves too thin.
Spreading ourselves too thin. Trying to achieve everything at once.
Yeah. And then you burn out.
And it's like a personal version of imperial overstretch.
Right.
And it often leads to burnout, stress, and ultimately a feeling of failure.
So the lesson here is to be mindful of our limits. To prioritize what truly matters.
Yes.
And avoid spreading ourselves too thin.
Don't try to do everything at once.
Chasing after every shiny object that catches our attention.
It's about recognizing that sustainable success,
whether on a personal or a national level, requires balance, discipline, and a clear sense of purpose.
It's like we need to cultivate this historical awareness.
I love that, historical awareness.
To see those patterns playing out around us and make conscious choices to steer away from those pitfalls.
To learn from the mistakes of the past.
Exactly. So it's not all doom and gloom.
No, it's not.
There's hope to be found in these historical lessons.
Absolutely. I mean, Glubb suggests that while individual empires, they may rise and fall, the human story is one of continuous progress.
So it's not the end of the world if an empire collapses.
It's part of a larger cycle.
Right.
And all of the knowledge, the innovations, the cultural exchanges that occurred during these cycles of rise and fall, they contribute to the advancement of humanity as a whole.
So it's like a relay race.
That's a great analogy.
Each empire carries the torch for a while, makes its contributions.
And then passes it on, to the next generation.
It's a beautiful way to think about it.
It is. And it reminds us that even in decline, there can be seeds of renewal, opportunities for growth and transformation.
So maybe fate isn't about some predetermined destiny, but about recognizing the patterns of the past and using that knowledge to make more informed choices in the present.
To shape our own future.
To break free from those deterministic cycles and create something new.
So it's not about predicting the future.
Right.
But about equipping ourselves with the wisdom of the past.
The lessons of history.
To navigate the present and shape a more sustainable and hopefully a little less doomed future.
I like that, a less doomed future.
Right.
That's what we're all striving for.
I think so. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
It really has. It's given us a lot to think about.
Food for thought.
It really is food for thought. And I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a renewed sense of both caution and possibility.
That's the right balance, I think.
I think so, too.
Caution and possibility.
Until next time, folks.
Yeah.
Keep those minds open, those history books handy.
Keep learning.
And let's see what we can create together.
Absolutely. I'm excited to see what the future holds.
Me too. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
Okay. Take care.
All right. Bye.